All right, everybody. Welcome back to the Mainly Hoops podcast. We're sticking with the Big 12 here, doing some transfer portal analysis. We're starting with Baylor. So, Baylor had a number of transfers. First, I just want you guys' thoughts on who we think the best Baylor transfer was coming out of this transfer portal. I'll start with Cody.
It is kind of a toss-up. I would say it's probably Obi Agbin for me. It's a guy that I watched a lot last year at Wyoming, coming from the Mountain West. I'm a Mountain West guy through and through. So he's a very talented shooter, he has a ton of range. Him and JJ White have a ton of range, but I just prefer Agbim's dribble creation and overall just shot creation in general. Super high release, super deep range, and his ability to get to the rim is also a pretty underrated trait for him. But I guess he's just more of a high floor guy than JJ White, coming from a better conference he had a ton of success, average near 18 points per game on pretty high volume, 44% from threes, extremely impressive. And coming from the D2 ranks and playing that well right away just kind of shows where his ceiling is at as well. So Agbin, probably the guy for me, and him and White at the guard spot, they fit very well together because they're both really good off-ball shooters as well with their ability to create. Then, like I said, I think White ends up playing the point guard position more than Agbin, but Agbin as a combo guard is going to be great in this system.
Marcus, what are your thoughts?
No, I mean Agbin, great point, and also like coming from Wyoming, where he didn't have a ton around him to still be as efficient as he was, and put up those numbers. I think that's a great get for them, especially after losing Rob Wright. For me, I think it's kind of like a 1A, 1B situation. I think Michael Rataj from Oregon State, great pickup for them. He was quite honestly like one of the more improved players in the country last year that nobody talked about. From the year prior, he more than doubled his points per game. He went from 8.3 to 16.9. On 48% shooting from the field this year, 35% from behind the arc. He really expanded his game and kind of had to, and also in, obviously Oregon State wasn't playing in the Pac-12 anymore, but it's not like the West Coast Conference was like a slouch league like it's traditionally treated. He had to play Gonzaga, St. Mary's, San Francisco, Santa Clara, like not bad teams by any stretch. So, I like his body of work from last year, right? He's super efficient, 32 minutes a game. He also rebounds the ball pretty well. Averaged over 7 in a game for them. So for me, it's more like his versatility, I think, being 6'9", long, efficient. I like his ability to go create, some scoring opportunities for Scott Drew's club.
Yeah, definitely. Do we think these players fit the system well? Do we think they don't fit the system well? What are our thoughts on that in Baylor's system?
Just for Rataj a little bit, he's extremely versatile as a scorer, can score through the post, can score in isolation from the top of the key, off the bounce. His perimeter scoring game isn't great. It's not something he's going to rely on. I mean, he took 92 3-point attempts, not extremely high volume, but 35% is pretty impressive for a guy with his type of, a little bit more of an inside game, a little bit more of a post-up style game. So I do like his game quite a bit, but I guess he fits well on the offensive end. On the defensive end, I'm a little bit worried. He's not like the greatest lateral mover, especially for a four-man in this system that Scott Drew likes to kind of switch a lot of actions. Last year, at times, he was switching every single action, playing North Chadomir at the 5 and then playing 4 guards around him. So maybe there's a little bit of a change in the defensive system coming for Scott Drew, just because there's a lot of the lateral movement across the board, especially in the front court, isn't the greatest. Though, like Rataj, Powell, like Bodo coming from high point, those bigs aren't guys that they're more drop coverage bigs in pick and roll as opposed to like high hedging or blitzing or even just straight up switching the pick and roll. So I don't love the fit for the front court with this defensive system at this point in time, but I could see Scott Drew kind of adapting to, he hasn't had the greatest of defenses the last couple of years, so maybe there's some change coming there.
That's kind of what I was going to say too, is like at this point, what really is Baylor's system? I feel like it's severely shifted from, it's a far cry from what they were obviously on that national championship team, in terms of their identity, their system, and as we talked about in the BYU video, right? Like their system got a little bit screwed up because they were expecting Rob Wright to be back. He wasn't now. And so, they've been pretty open about saying like they didn't go after certain guys because they were under the assumption that Rob Wright was coming back to run the show. Now losing him obviously is an extreme blow to them. So I don't really know. Like, I think Scott Drew's going to have to change some things. Like last year didn't work, and I can't envision him coming back in this 2025-26 season, still with like a weaker front court and trying the same thing over and over again. Like he's going to go insane doing that. So I think he's going to have to change. Otherwise, like, it's going to be another tough year at Baylor.
Yeah, that kind of leads into my next question. With these additions, with the exit of Rob Wright, do we feel like Baylor is better for the next season, or do we think they've gotten a little worse?
I mean, I do I like some of the individual players on this roster at least from an offensive standpoint. It's hard to be better considering the guys that they lost. You're losing a top 5 draft pick in VJ Edgecombe. Jeremy Roach and Jaden Nunn have had great college careers. Obviously, Omir had a really good college career as well, but I do think it was kind of time for him. Well, he was only at Baylor for 1 year, but it was kind of time for him to go. He didn't really bring a ton of value on the defensive end. So it's hard to say if they're going to be better or worse at this point in time. I do think there's a little more upside, especially if Scott Drew is going to potentially switch some things on the defensive end. Like Caden Powell and Jocelyn Bodo are really good rim protectors. And if you can actually filter some the opposing offense into them a little bit, I think they can provide some value. Plus, they're pretty good on the defensive glass, and that's an area that Baylor has struggled the last couple of years. So if they can improve their rim protection and defensive rebounding, maybe it takes a little bit away from their like turnover forcing upside, because there's not a ton of great perimeter defenders on this roster. Like Skillings is fine. I wouldn't call him a great defender. Cameron Carr coming off the bench is solid, not elite. And a guy like Isaac Williams coming from Texas A&M, Corpus Christi, he's not going to play much of a role due to his offensive limitations, but I do think they're going to be okay. They're going to play some sort of role, but I don't really think this Baylor team is going to be forcing as many turnovers as they have in the past.
Yeah, I don't really see them being better than they were last year. I kind of feel like they're maybe about the same or maybe a little bit worse. I just don't know if they have the same offensive talent that they had. Obviously, like last year, they dealt with a lot of injuries. Roach was in and out. Nunn, Love, they were both banged up. Like last year, you didn't really see the full picture, I guess. So maybe these guys are comparable. But I worry about them on that. And they do have a 5-star coming in. I don't know, Yesufu. I don't know exactly how to say his name, but he's the 14th ranked recruit, 5-star. Seems like they get a 5-star every year. So, we'll have to see what they have in him, whether he can be a big contributor on the offensive end right out the jump. But I do have some concerns on the offensive end for them, in terms of like consistently putting up points, especially in some of these grinded out games that you get in the Big 12. When you're playing teams like Houston and Iowa State, and when Baylor doesn't really have what we expect to be an elite defense, it's going to be tough. I think they're going to really have to like limit possessions and hopefully like turn these games into bloodbaths.
Yeah,
I have heard good things about Yesufu too. Like, big physical guard that could potentially even start over Dan Skillings, and maybe he's the two-way guard that this team needs to kind of elevate this team's floor and ceiling. But overall, at this point in time, it is kind of difficult to see them being better. But the fact that they were what they finished as an 8 seed in the tournament this past year, like, it was a bit like unorthodox to see that happen. So overall, I mean, I do think they could potentially be better than that. It kind of depends on the development of JJ White as well. You know, coming from the Summit League, typically a lot of those transfers kind of fizzle out because that's a really, really bad defensive league. So I guess part of it depends on how he develops and how he translates to the Big 12, and part of it is how, you know, the freshman in Yesifo also translates right away.
Yeah, so kind of expecting much of the same, it sounds like, from Baylor. Any final thoughts for you guys? Or
I just think, you know, my last thing, I think that, like, especially coming into this season, like, Baylor's expectations are going to be much lower, I think, especially coming off of what this last season was. So when it comes time for, like, later in the season, you know, obviously, like, the higher you start in the poll, like, the further you have to fall. And so, like, the respect that you have, you know, early in the season, like, I don't know if are they going to be in the top 25 to start? Like, probably not.
Right.
Maybe back half or like back end of it. You know, so they're going to need to pick up some key victories, because I don't think, like, they're going to be getting the same typical, like, Baylor respect that we're used to.
Mm-hmm. And because of their flying under the radar and no one's really expecting them to do anything, they could perform better. You know, the pressure's kind of off on them. But Cody, do you have any thoughts? Or
yeah, I mean, my gut feel says they're a borderline top 25 team at this point in time. I think with the roster that he's built, like, obviously they're not going to be eye popping in any area, but I do think their defensive floor has an opportunity to be a bit higher with the added rim protection. I'm just, like, speculating on the scheme change. If the scheme doesn't change, like, I really worry about it. I do think there is something to Jerome Tang leaving and this defense getting a lot worse over the last 3 years. So it's, you know, it's going to really be up to Scott Drew this season to make some changes.
Yeah, absolutely. Scott Drew. Hopefully he's got his hands full, but he's a good coach. He knows what to do. But as always, thank you guys for listening to the Mainly Hoops podcast, and we'll be back with some more Big 12 content.